really interesting fight that just seemed to come together all of a sudden between Giga Chikadze, representing Kings MMA, taking on Jamey Simmons, the Afro Samurai. And Matt, for the Afro Samurai, just signed a 4-fight deal with the UFC, getting the call up to take on a guy in Giga Chikadze that's absolutely rolling right now. I mean, it's been a while since he's lost a fight. It was the Austin Springer fight back on Contender Series, and it was one where this guy is such a good kickboxer. We know him from his time with Glory, and he was really searching and fishing for submissions in that fight. He ended up getting finished, went back to the drawing board, and the real knock against Giga Chikadze that we had going into his last fight against Omar Morales was he doesn't throw much for volume. He's really a cerebral fighter. He's picking his shots. In that fight against Omar Morales, he threw all that out the window and put on a perfect performance, really. I mean, he looked amazing. Morales coming down from 55. I changed my pick later on in the week with question mark kicks. I went with Morales. Matt, you had Morales. But originally I had Chikadze. Otherwise, I mean, you looked at that fight, he looked amazing. He really did. It was a perfect performance by Chikadze, and he's a big guy for 145 pounds. Well, he's taking on Jamey Simmons. You might find Simmons listed as James Krause Simmons, not to be confused with the James Krause from Glory Fitness and MMA. And you look at Jamey Simmons coming out of Pura Vida, BJJ, and MMA. You got a lot of really good training partners there. I know Ode Osborne's one of them, Zach Otto as well. There's a lot of good fighters coming out of that gym that you might not really think of. And for Jamey Simmons, his base is in wrestling, coming out of the University of Wisconsin's Stevens Point. That's it. And he wrestled in college at 157 and 149 pounds. He's a small guy. You might see him listed as 5'6" on some websites and 5'5" on some others. Not a big guy. But he reminds me of one fighter in particular, and this is going to sound really weird. He reminds me of Frankie Edgar because he's not a big guy, but he fights up in the bigger weight classes. In his MMA career, he's fought at lightweight, he's fought at featherweight, and he's fought at bantamweight. He's knocking guys out. You go back and watch his last fight, and I mean, yeah, he fought Morgan Sickinger at Pure FC 16. Now, this was back almost a year ago. Hits him with a straight right, rocks him, follows it up. And the other thing, and the reason why there's that comparison for me to Frankie Edgar, is you go back and watch a lot of his fights, and he will rely on his wrestling background, but it's not like when he gets rocked. It's not to a fault. His wrestling in MMA is actually really good. He'll take guys down. He'll chain together takedowns. He'll land some nice ground and pound. You want to see another fight? The Terrence Allman fight. It's a weird one because Allman maybe breaks his thumb in the first round, but they keep going. Jamey Simmons, to me, was one of those regional guys that definitely deserved to call up. I mean, maybe you'll disagree with me if you watch his fight at LFA 70 where he gets knocked out and submitted in 13 seconds. Go watch that one. It's weird. All of this to say, Matt, this is way too big of a step up. Like, I would think Jamey Simmons would get a shot on Contender Series against, like, a decent fighter, not against Giga Chikadze. It seems weird.
Yeah, it is a really weird matchmaking because Giga Chikadze is a guy who I think we're more high on him than a lot of people are, even though we didn't pick him to win his last fight. But after the Omar Morales fight, like, that's a legitimate UFC win. You can say a lot of his other fights have, oddly, either he's been come in on short notice or his opponent's been switched on short notice. And that was one of the first fights where it's been like full camp Chikadze. And I'm not saying that's one of the new mythical figures of MMA, but who knows? Maybe it will be. For poor Jamey Simmons, though, you go from fighting, regional level talent, and if you do kind of do a bit of a dissection on his record, even the last opponent who he fought, who was 20-12, I believe at the time, if you actually watch him, he doesn't fight like a 20-12 fighter. You can tell the record's very deceiving. So for Jamey Simmons, I like the bare bones of his MMA game. He's a good wrestler. He has good striking. He has good submission game. He does a lot of positive things. But the problem is you're feeding him to a guy who can do everything he does and kind of has the counter to a lot of what Jamey Simmons does. I really like the counter knees and striking of Chikadze when other people go for takedowns. He's really good at... You can tell that he's had to adopt his striking a little bit for MMA just to defend the takedown as well, because he fights with his hands much lower. He fights in sort of not a crouch stance, but you can tell his center of gravity is much lower, and he's great at throwing knees right up the middle. And to bring up, like you had mentioned at LFA 70, when Jamey Simmons while he shoots in for a takedown, holds his hands way too far out, gets kneed in the head, and then goes down almost immediately. Giga Chikadze kind of has made his whole MMA career off doing that. He's great at punishing you for your takedown attempts, beating you up on the feet. And at distance, Jamey Simmons hasn't fought anyone with nearly the level of striking that Chikadze has. So if he is able to start teeing off with those leg kicks, if he starts going to the body, by the end of the fight is really going to be wearing on Jamey Simmons. And I'm not saying Chikadze by finish, because it's too much for prediction, but Chikadze is a massive favorite. It's hard to fight him on a full camp. I really doubt that a blue chip prospect's going to come in and just beat him on a week's notice.
That's it. Like, I don't like... So if this fight goes the way that the prediction goes, so let's say Jamey Simmons loses this fight, what do you do? Like, you can't go back to Contender Series, so you have to find somebody that's in the UFC. It's just a weird job of matchmaking. Giga Chikadze is on a win streak, like we mentioned. He's won 6 in a row. The UFC wins. Again, Brandon Davis, he won by split. He beats Jamal Emmers by split. Those were arguable fights. He beats Erwin Rivera, who came up from 35 on short notice and got beat up, but gave a decent account of himself. And then he beat Omar Morales and beat him fairly soundly. And then you look at the two names that he was supposed to face. He was supposed to face Mike Davis, and that fell out. Mike Davis, I wish you could fight in 2020. He's my low-key, like, you got to watch this guy type of fighter. And he's supposed to fight Alex Caceres at one point before the Morales fight. Like, those are some recognizable names. For Jamey Simmons, he was supposed to take on John DeJesus back at the start of the year. That fight fell out because the entire card fell out because of the way of the world. And then he's supposed to take on Sean West at Caged Aggression 28 back about a month ago. But again, he signed with the UFC. So if we have a look at the odds, they're limited. This fight was just announced in the last couple of days. Chikadze opened a minus 485 favorite, minus 490 at this point. Simmons opened a plus 350, now at a plus 379. If we have a look at the total votes on Tapology, 96% of 649 votes going with Chikadze, 62% saying he's going to win by knockout. Again, I like what Jamey Simmons has, and if Simmons can really work the takedowns, who knows? He could go out there and get a win. I don't think that that's crazy to say. For me, this is a push. I don't have Chikadze as anything like a lock, anything like that at all. This is a fight that I would stay away from, and I think there's a lot of upside with Jamey Simmons. I'm probably one of the few people in the world that's selling him this much.
I was just say you're popping his tires.
I'm looking forward to this debut. I just think it's a very winnable fight for Giga Chikadze. He's fought a lot of fighters similar to this. Again, the Austin Springer fight, he lost. He had moments in that fight. And again, you talk about those strikes straight up the middle. Front kicks, knees, the straight, just straight hands. I mean, there's a lot of things that he can do and a lot of things that he can do to counter Jamey Simmons' game. So I think Simmons is just a little bit too early here. If he picks up a win, that's the other trouble. You beat Giga Chikadze, you're way up there. So it's just a weird bit of matchmaking for me. I have this one for Chikadze. How do you see this one?
Yeah, Chikadze all day. Like I said, I'd favor him against most people in the top, maybe not top 20, but those top 30 to 25 to even, anyone outside the top 15, basically. Giga Chikadze is either going to give them a competitive fight or beat them. So coming in on a week's notice, yeah, it's too much too soon for poor Jamey Simmons. Well, Chikadze probably by finish.
A good opportunity for Jamey Simmons, but we both have Giga Chikadze in this fight. I'm really looking forward to this card. We have a great main event. You have Thiago Santos taking on Glover Teixeira. Are Santos' legs back in full form? Well, we'll find out. Really looking forward to this card. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.